ReZero, Volume 5, Chapter 5, Part 4, Acedia. Kill, 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 kill! Amid the darkness, dead to the world, he spewed enough bloodlust and hatred to burn a man alive. He murmured and spat over and over, forgetting how many times it had been. His scorching hatred did not subside. He had never hated anyone, not a person, not any living being, as much as he did then. Since arriving in that world, he'd experienced hatred of the formless thing called fate several times over. He'd been beaten down into the ground, with reality pitilessly thrust in his face, that callous world making him pay for bad decisions with his life. The times he had hated and cursed were fewer than the number of his fingers. But to this point in his life, he'd never hated another individual to that extent. Pedalgeese! Romanticonti! Voicing the name on his lips, he recalled the man behind his eyes. His eardrums wallowed in his own shout. His brain thought about that man, a fire raged inside him that made every drop of his blood boil. What the hell was with that man, anyway? Subaru understood nothing about his identity. All he knew was that Pedalgeese walked far from the path of sanity, that he was a demon in human flesh who could not be reasoned with, and that he was a despicable person, the foulest of villains. He was the most awful of men who had hurt Rem, the girl who'd sacrificed her own body in an attempt to rescue Subaru, and went on to humiliate and dishonor her life. He couldn't even imagine the damage that letting that man live would wreak. That was why Subaru had to kill him. Subaru needed to kill him with his own hands, not letting anyone else do the deed. He had to kill Pedalgeese with his own hands. If he couldn't do that, how could he pay him back for Rema's death? Kill, kill. I will kill you with my own hands. Subaru embraced the bloodlust pouring from his own mouth and earnestly twisted his own body, clinking its shackles. He tried to force his arms to the manacles or kick them off his legs several times over. The manacles were clasped tightly and rather painfully on Subaru's limbs to begin with. He felt the pain. His fury would not permit him to forget it. But even as that discomfort clawed at his nerves, he put it back with thoughts of what Rem had undergone. Even if the manacles tore off his hands and wrists, he didn't really care. As long as he could escape, as long as he could move a single finger, as long as he had a single tooth left, he'd snuff out Pedalgeese's life. Several hours had already passed since his foe had departed the cave. The lagmite ore had lost most of its power, so the cavern fell into darkness. Subaru wondered if it was some kind of mistake. He was inside a natural cavern, yet not a single insect lived within it. He was the only living being there. Pedalgeese! A moment before Subaru noticed the darkness and silence, he wrung the hateful man's name from his throat to keep his thoughts intact. Within the gloom, unable to see a thing, Subaru could sense nothing beyond himself and the whole world. His ragged breaths, the beats of his heart, the sounds of the chains chafing, the drip drops of water, isolation and solitude quickly weakened the human heart. If he remained in this place like that much longer, with no change whatsoever. Whoa! Pedalgeese! Pedalgeese! Subaru abandoned his body to hatred, as if rejecting the image of his mental balance crumbling away. The human mind, walled off from the outside world, was well on its way to decay, to collapse, to a final end. Subaru screamed, as if trying to avert his eyes from reality, trying to shake off the fear of being left behind. As long as he could shout his hatred, he would remain sane. As long as he was enveloped in bloodlust like a madman, he would not go mad. To keep his sanity, Subaru needed hatred. Subaru did not know how many more hours passed after that. I'll... Subaru's consciousness hovered somewhere between alertness and unconsciousness. Fatigue, debilitation, abrasions on his body, all these dragged down Subaru's body and spirit. Still bound by the manacles, his limbs, abused beyond their limits, no longer accepted the brain's instructions. The metal scraped his flesh and even wore down the bones of his wrists and ankles. Just moving around sent him into convulsions from the ferocious pain. Kill, 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 kill. In spite of that, even then, bloodlust welled up from the very bottom of his heart. That moment, with both body and head no longer listening, it was the heart alone that kept Subaru going. It had been dozens of hours since he had been abandoned in that world of solitude. His body and spirit had reached their limits, but Subaru's consciousness had not shut down. Archbishop of Sin, Pedalgeese of Sloth, Witch Cult, right hand, left hand, unseen hands, index finger, ring finger, little finger, diligence, sloth, sloth, sloth. These were the keywords Subaru had gleaned from Pedalgeese's high-pitched, shouted ramblings. With his head dying on him, he recalled these terms, wondering what they meant, thinking about Pedalgeese to keep his consciousness together even a little bit, to keep his hatred astir. He needed to remember a fresher, firmer, clearer image of the man's face, reflected along the same lines, the man's voice, his appearance, his way of walking, his manner of speaking, exactly as if thinking about one's dearly beloved. The direction of Subaru's sentiments was the only thing that had changed. He was still using it as fuel to ignite his soul and keep himself awake. From afar, it seemed Subaru's spirit had already arrived at the dimension of madness. Perhaps the mind would wear down and vanish first. Perhaps his body, unable to keep up with his active mind, would expire first. He was on a path where the end was nigh, and was simply a choice between one dead end or the other. Surely, keeping his mind intact no longer had any meaning other than that. Subaru continued his futile struggle, but he was truly alone in all the world. His panting within the darkness had been frail, but his breath abruptly caught when he felt that something was off. It was troublesome to even move his head, but Subaru looked in the direction of the disturbance. Of course, his field of vision displayed nothing but the darkness of the cavern. He felt something from that darkness nonetheless. Slowly, truly slowly, he felt a presence rising. It moved at only a snail's pace, bit by bit, but inexorably drew closer to Subaru. Somehow, even within complete darkness, it seemed to know where he was. Subaru shuddered with urgency and unease at the individual. That feeling immediately fell away as a different feeling rose up in the back of his mind. Where is this feeling coming from in the first place? He heard a sound like clothes rustling, an extremely faint breath. The distance was rather close. No, more than several yards away from Subaru. Having thought that far, he suddenly realized it was at close range, not from the entrance, the presence had abruptly appeared. No, what if she had started breathing again? Rem? He called out the name of the girl to whom the sounds and presence were likeliest to belong to. That can't be right, Subaru's logical mind denied. Though he couldn't endure looking straight at her, the last thing he had seen while the cave had light was the horrific state of Rem's body, the point that he thought one of her fallen foes was far more likely to rise from the dead. She couldn't be alive. She was dead. Of course she was dead. Yet in spite of that, he half believed that the presence in front of his own eyes was alive, and it must be Rem. And if she were dead, it was probably her just the same, coming to take him away. It had to be Rem either way. Therefore, there was no reason to be worried about the presence at all. Rem. Rem. He addressed her, clinging to hope, but the silence returned with a vengeance. Even so, Subaru's voice made the other being certain of its goal, because it felt like it had started crawling just a little faster. It was truly only a very slight change. Slowly, slowly, he heard something pulling across the cold, rocky surface of the ground. Subaru pulled himself up, with the chains attached to his hands and feet ringing as he moved as close to her as he could. He advanced such a short distance, and the tormenting shame summoned tears once again, though he thought they were dry. He kept himself from sobbing. He didn't want Rem to hear that. Within the darkness, only the sound of crawling continued, the distance closing and closing, and then Subaru felt the struggling presence reach his body. The instant he felt something graze his upper arm, he instantly tried to take her hand and call out her name. His throat froze over. The grasp on his arm was so light, so cold, that none would think it came from a living person. Rem. Rem's body lay face down beneath the kneeling Subaru. The girl's slender arm was shaking a little, but it was as cold as could be, devoid of warmth-giving blood. She was as icy as a corpse. She could no longer be here in this world. Yet though she should have been finished, she dragged her body over and clung to Subaru. She touched his arms, his shoulders, his chest, his head, as if to make sure they were there. She pressed everything against him in a hug from the front. Subaru, silently accepting the embrace of the dead, had no idea what would happen. A breath away from each other, Subaru was certain that it was Rem hugging his body. However, the flesh felt dead to the touch, unreal, as if she were animated solely by the dying embers of her life. It was not unpleasant. Subaru meekly returned her continuing embrace. When he thought about it, they had been close against each other many times. That might have been the first time they touched like that. Perhaps that was how Rem wanted the final moment of her life to be. If so, the least he could do was respond to her wishes. Even with Rem already dying and Subaru having already given up, perhaps his arms could transmit his feelings to her. It was Rem who brought the continuing cold, silent embrace to an end. Rem. Subaru hugged her. Her body surrendered its strength, collapsing onto his lap. He hastily moved to support her. The next motion made that impossible. After all. Ugh! Rem grabbed his outstretched arms and smashed them to the ground. Subaru, pulled forward and down, was shocked at the sudden violence achieved with strength far beyond his imagination. Hence, he was slow to react to Rem's next action. Subaru's arms, pressed to the floor, bathed in a large amount of liquid. It was a cold, viscous substance with a rusty scent. The fact that Subaru had become so used to the smell made him rather slow to realize that Rem had coughed up blood. A chill ran up his spine, the discomfort so much of another person's blood pouring over him. The bad feeling vanished in an instant. The whisper vibrated faintly in the air as the intervention of mana achieved its result. Ah! Pain, something like sharp digging into his wrists, seized Subaru. The unexpected numbing ache shot from his wrist straight through his forearms, all the way to his shoulders. He didn't know what was going on. He shuddered at the thought that Rem was doing this, coughing blood on him, sending sudden jolts of pain through him, proceeding to turn both arms into useless appendages. The next moment, the wrist manacles, unable to bear the pressure pushing out from the inside, noisily blew apart. Oh. Destruction sent metal fragments flying. A tinkling sound echoed throughout the cavern. Subaru breathed raggedly as his pain radically eased. His entire arms felt incredibly free despite the scalding sensation. He opened and closed both of his now inverted hands, confirming they could still move. Then he understood. Rem, you... Rem had used magic to freeze the blood from her mouth, utilizing the pressure to destroy the manacles from within. Of course, both of Subaru's arms, having directly endured the effects of magic, hadn't emerged unscathed. That said, he could rotate his wrists and get his fingers to do as he asked. If he disregarded the pain, he could move them normally again. In other words, Rem had succeeded. Subaru was about to voice his thanks when he felt a light body bump against his chest. Light. So very, very light. She'd lost so much blood. The last of her consciousness was a candle in the wind, ready to be snuffed out. In other words, her life would soon expire. Rem, wait. Rem, wait. Don't leave me, he might have meant to say. Do you hate me? He might have wanted to ask. Subaru despaired with the true thoughts and feelings behind both. Once again, she protected a weak, miserable creature such as him. She'd literally come back from the dead to save him. Yeti. Rem's tongue, as cold as a corpse's, tried to form words with some kind of meaning behind them. She barely had the strength to speak a single syllable, and she'd wrung magical energy out of her immobile body and hazy mind. She'd worked herself past the point of death to accomplish her objective, but she wanted to leave one last thing behind. Subaru, not wanting to let such a message slip by, embraced her body and drew it close. He brought his ear near quivering lips so that he could carve each word, each syllable, upon his very soul. The girl's last words were, if I, She died. That moment, Rem died. Within Subaru's arms, her light body grew heavy. Her form, both light and so heavy, her frame completely bereft of her soul, burdened Subaru's entire being with its extensive weightlessness. In the end, haltingly, Rem had told Subaru, live. His wails resounded throughout the dark cave. By the time Subaru removed his leg shackles and exited the cave, it had been several hours since Rem had died. His hands, free from the wrist manacles, snatched a cross sword from the nearest figure's corpse. Using that, he'd unfettered his legs over a period of long hours. Light. Subaru rotated his scraped ankles. Each step sent pain running through him, fierce enough to make his mind go blank. He ignored that, not a problem. His legs were more than enough to support him while he carried Rem's remains. He tossed the broken crucifix sword against a wall. The impact made the lagomite ore in the wall glow, bathing the cavern in pale light. Subaru felt like his eyes were burning. With Rem in his arms, he gazed at her face, not having seen it in the light for over a day. Tears gently fell from his eyes. Subaru would never be able to forget the cruel state of the girl in his arms. "Let's go, Rem." Subaru relied on the light as he made his way through the dark cave, following the narrow corridor to the entrance. From inside the passage, the rock blocking the entrance was transparent. Subaru passed right through it. It was probably some kind of magic trick to obstruct vision. It was probably closer to a hologram than a mirage. Subaru had neither the determination nor a compelling reason to consider the matter further. As Subaru exited the cave, it was not the light created by Lagmite ore that greeted him, but the orange rays from the sun. The light pouring from the sunset scorched the world beneath it. The sun was sinking past the horizon of the forest and hills beyond it, giving its final greeting before retiring from its daily duty and dyeing the world in the same color as its own flames. Subaru, greeted by that scene, stood with the rock wall behind him and unfamiliar trees standing everywhere as he looked. A quick glance around the area revealed no trace of a road, forest trail, or anything else that resembled a path. He should have expected as much. A group infiltrating an area would logically set up far from human habitation. But I'll walk. His destination was the same as before, Roswell's mansion in the Mather's dominion. Subaru was sure that Rem had been heading to the mansion with him when his mind was a hazy abyss. He rummaged through the memories of the dragon coach rocking him as he rested peacefully on Rem's lap. Thinking of Rem made his heart tighten painfully. He wanted to thank her and tell her he was sorry. When he remembered Petalgeese, his body creaked with hatred, almost as if it would snap. Rage, sadness, hatred, love. These supported Subaru. These kept Subaru alive. His path was uncertain, and there was nothing to guide him. Even so, Subaru's mind rebelled, and his feet stepped forward to search for an uncertain destination. Perhaps it might be said that what happened to him was nothing short of a miracle. Without anyone's aid, with nothing to rely on, Subaru arrived at his destination. The one desire of his shriveled mind was granted. Surely it would be called nothing else. It was the first miracle that world had bestowed upon Subaru since its arrival. There was indeed a deity that governed fate. That god was finally smiling upon Subaru. And then Subaru knew. If there was a deity that governed fate, its manner of laughter was surely the same as Petalgeese's. The village had been violated in exactly the same hellish manner he had seen before. The houses had been burned down, the villagers were covered in blood. Remains of those who had futilely struggled against the theft of their lives had been carelessly gathered in the center of the community, piled into a mountain of corpses. He looked right, he looked left. There was only smoldering embers and the stench of death. He could not hope for any survivors. Looking over the corpses of the villagers, Subaru realized that this world held one difference from the one before it. Petra, Mildo, Luca, Maina, Cain, Tyne. The cruel sight of the children's corpses was a part of the mountain of corpses and the river of blood. With Rem still in his arms, Subaru's knees let go. He fell on the spot, clutching tight at the cold body in his arms, and wept. What had he been doing all that time? Knowing what would happen, why did he sit back and watch? Until he slipped through the game trail and saw the smoke rising from the direction of the village, Subaru had completely banished from his own brain the hellish sight that had shattered his mind. No, he averted his eyes. He wrapped himself in grief over Rem's death and used it and his limitless hatred of Petalgeese as excuses to deny his memories of that hell. Once again, Subaru Natsuki had fled from reality due to his selfishness. The result was the sight before his eyes. The children had died there because Rem, who would have protected the children like last time, had been unable to arrive at the village. The adults were not able to let the children escape. The sight of their own children being murdered as if for sport had been burned into their eyes before they, too, died in agony. Not a single one had been spared. Subaru had stood by and done nothing, and this tragedy was the end result, leaving only despair and resentment in its wake. The contemptible reality ate at Subaru's heart. I get it now. I get all of it. Pedal keys. The man who had killed the villagers, the children, and Rem. He, the madman, had committed those unforgivable acts not once, but twice. His plan was set in stone. He knew what he needed to do. Pedal keys. He had to kill Pedalgeese, murder him, kill him, keep killing him until the last cell of his body was burned away, his entire being erased from that world. Nothing short of that could even begin to make up for these deaths. His thoughts were dyed with nothing but hatred. His field of vision turned crimson red. He knew that what was left of the blood he'd lost had mostly gone to his head. It was even bleeding out of his nose. He roughly wiped away the nosebleed, regripped Rem so that she would not be stained, and rose to his feet. His knees shook, his ankles quivered. Whether he could stand, let alone walk, was an open question. Kill, 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 kill. I'll kill you. But if he could walk, if he could move forward, then he could surely tear out the man's windpipe with his teeth. Dragged forward by his hardened, bloodlust-dyed mind, Subaru headed toward the mansion. He'd seen hell at the village. Next was the mansion. What was it that awaited him there? Right before his death, right before he started things over, something had happened, but his memories were broken, unclear. He thought that he'd arrived at the mansion and seen something that decisively cracked his psyche. He desperately lit up the neurons in his head, trying to remember what it was. He'd found Rem dead. And this time, that experience had already run its course. Spontaneously, laughter spilled out of him. Really, nothing has changed at all, has it? Only the order had been altered. Nothing had changed in terms of what had happened. Had he ever before spent his relived time in such idleness as he had then? Before, no matter what had happened, Subaru gained something over the course of time. Trapped in his own cage, he hadn't been able to salvage anything. Now that he'd encountered the same hell once again, was there anything he could gain from it? Having wasted his return by death, did he have any value at all? At some point, he began to lose sight of the target of his bloodlust. Pedalgeese. That name was all that kept Subaru going. That was a good thing. He was who Subaru wanted to kill, right? So kill him already. After he'd been killed, could die for all he cared. Who is... anyway? Just kill them too, then. Yeah, if everyone dies, all the better. When such static began to invade Subaru's thoughts, his mind flickered on and off, over and over. Subaru looked ahead of him with bloodshot eyes as he once again straddled the fence between sanity and madness. Having already decided to head to the mansion, come what may, he chose to postpone dealing with the immediate problem like he always did. Then, the instant he crested the hill, Subaru witnessed the destruction of Roswell Manor. A ferocious sound erupted, and smoke rose all around. The roof collapsed, the terrace fell to pieces. All at once, the glass windows cracked and shattered into glistening shards, the cracked white walls wailing like a maiden as they were rent asunder. When he arrived, Subaru stared up at the front gate, dumbfounded at the overpowering devastation. The mansion had lost its shape in a single instant, just as if someone had demolished it with explosives. The familiar building had lost all integrity. Its meticulously arranged garden was buried in rubble, and the ruin that had once been the mansion was falling to pieces. What the... He groped through his memories, but he had no memory of this experience. Something had happened that he didn't remember. Or perhaps the shock of being on the verge of death was so vivid that he'd forgotten the destruction surrounding him as he died. Having lost his bearings, an all-too-thin man's crazed laughter rose in the back of his trembling mind. If the slaughter of the village had been that madman's deeds, he'd surely directed his vile actions at the mansion as well. If that was the case, was this destruction Pedalgeese's? What in the world is he doing? Faced with the spectacle beyond his understanding, Subaru continued to carry Rem as he exhaled white breaths. Discouraged, he craved a stronger sensation in his arms. It was cold that flowed through his hands and turned to sadness in his chest. His body shivered. He coughed at the cold pain in his lungs. Far too late, Subaru finally realized that his own ragged breaths looked like white clouds. The moment he realized it, pain enveloped his body, stabbing at his skin. His exhalations were white, and the air he inhaled was freezing his internal organs. He was breathing blowing snow. He felt like his body was dying from the inside out. Subaru's instinct screamed to him that his life was in jeopardy. I don't know what's going on. His entire body robbed of its warmth. It became hard to even stand, and so he buckled. He squatted down on the spot, leaning forward before he hit the ground, and fell on his side, still carrying Rem. That was his final act of resistance. His fallen body froze to the very core, his limbs no longer able to even tremble. Unable to convey his thoughts to his limbs, Subaru knew that his mind had been severed from his body. Subaru had already experienced it several times. He would never get used to that feeling of desolate helplessness. His nervous system sent commands to his entire body to resist the impending end, even a little, to somewhere, anywhere that could move. Behind his closed right eyelid, his eye was barely functional. With all his spirit, Subaru moved his eyelid, using his barely functional eye to look up at an angle, the direction of the mansion. Once it reached that position, it would probably never move again. Before the view faded, he saw something. He saw a beast standing on the wreckage of the collapsed mansion. It was an unholy beast, gray fur all over its body, with glowing golden eyes. The sight of it standing on all fours, calmly swaying its long, long tail, was most mysterious. More than anything, the beast was enormous, rivaling the mansion itself. Holding the sight from afar, Subaru understood what had caused the mansion's collapse, the sudden appearance of that beast from inside it. Of course, the building couldn't withstand the pressure of something that huge emerging from inside. The gray beast swayed, surveying the area with its eyes. Its face most resembled that of a great feline predator. Sharp fangs poked out of its mouth. The giant being exhaled breaths like glowing white snow. It painted the world into a frozen hell with the white powder to freeze all that lived. What was that? As he thought about it, his vision widened out. He realized that he'd stopped breathing. At some point, he stopped feeling the bitter cold. Warmth, though, he could feel. That warmth tempted Subaru to give himself entirely to it, to forget the burning hatred, to forget sadness enough to tear his soul asunder. Forget anything and everything. Forget. Let your mind wander to oblivion and the frozen warmth within. Just before he fell asleep, it felt like he heard someone's voice.
Sleep, together with my daughter.
It was a low, ferocious voice. It somehow sounded forlorn and sad. It didn't understand. Not within the meaningless serenity. Shubrunatsky melted. He melted. And then